monthly
This
meeting
conference will
of the
now be
Cape Carteret
recorded.
Planning Board. First on the agenda is approving the minutes from last meeting from March 21st. Has everybody had a chance to look it over, and are there any changes? No changes. Can I get a motion to accept those minutes? Second? All in favor? Is there anyone here for public comment? Okay, great. Okay, next thing on the list is the rezoning request for 123 Taylor Notion Road. That is the parcel on Taylor Notion that is adjacent to the golf course. I think everything is in the packet. Everybody has seen which one it is. Right now it's all wooded, so you can't see much about it. It backs up to our lakes. And the request, the zoning request, is to go from what currently is zoned R30 to R10M. And if everybody remembers, we made all those changes to R10M when we updated the UDO for all of that. Is there any discussion on that? It's pretty cut and dry. I think because we did all the work that we did previously on the UDO changes, there's nothing on this request that seemed to be outside of the UDO. Bubba, did you have anything you wanted to say about this?
Here to answer questions. Just want to thank you for the opportunity to present this. We've tried to follow all the guidelines set forth, and if there's anything outside of that, we certainly will address it.
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
I have extensively read this, have no objection to it, as I'm speaking of the president of the golf course. The golf course is in favor of this rezoning. One picky little thing on the application, it referred to existing townhomes beside if they're condominiums. Sorry, but. Sorry.
What's the definition different?
Well, it's the definition. The difference is there are recorded documents in the courthouse establishing those 4 units as condominiums. They are separately owned.
You mean the ones
Yes.
adjacent to it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
But I meant, if you call something a townhouse and you call something a condominium, does that connote a change in ownership or?
I'm merely pointing out that the condominium has recorded documents establishing unit ownership as a condominium.
I understand.
Now,
Yeah. So condominium is a legal
yes,
description of a
That's
property.
right.
Townhouse is a style
that's right.
of a building.
That's right.
But we've just come to call a townhouse those connected 2-story
Right.
things.
Right.
And condominiums, we
Yeah.
tend to think of as almost an apartment house, like the ones in Cedar.
Yeah. And generally, they're owned, if there were 4, there's generally 4 ownerships unless
Yeah.
somebody buys it and leases it, rents it out to people.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean to get bogged down on this. I apologize. The main thing is, as one of the adjacent property owners, and I don't know if we've heard from others, but as the representative of Star Hill Golf Club of Cape Carteret, North Carolina, Incorporated, we have no objection and support the project.
So right now, we're not talking about the project. Remember that what we're voting on
There's a rezoning.
is just the
That's-
rezoning.
that's what I'm talking
To
about.
change it from R30 residential to R10M.
Yes, ma'am.
And everything is listed exactly. I don't remember us coming up with a minimum square footage of 900 square feet. That seems little to me.
That was already included in the UDO. It's just not one of the topics that the board discussed when you made those changes, but it was already in there. So.
Okay, so if there's nothing to discuss, no other comments?
Well, if somebody was going to make a motion, I was going to comment at the discussion point on it, that's all. But I can do it ahead of time, if you prefer.
Well, if you want to go by Robert's Rules of Order, I move that the planning board approve the request to pass this on to the town board for rezoning with an affirmative.
Can I get a second? Sarah is seconding. Can I get a show of hands for?
Discussion first.
Oh, we have that. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's, Paxton's right, that's the way it's supposed to be. And I, in 25 years doing this, I'm kind of stuck on that, so, anyway, yeah, I went through that, and it's pretty much, we wore this one out pretty well in the last meeting, and I was, of the places that we said in the last time we considered rezoning, this was the one that was very obviously that would really fit nicely in the town. It's adjacent to one already. It's got the golf course in its back and a little more traffic on Taylor and Ocean, but that's fine. So I'm supportive.
More tax revenue, that's great.
Any other discussion? Have we gotten anything from any of these other property owners?
Well, we have not. We have not publicized this at this point. So I was waiting for the planning board's decision tonight, and we'll be sending out notices to all the adjacent property owners and advertisements and signage and all those kind of things. And there'll be a public hearing scheduled for the Board of Commissioners on May 8th if the planning board makes a recommendation tonight.
Totally inappropriate for me to say this. I have contacted the neighboring condominium owners, the residents there, just to let them know of our plan. So they're aware of it, and they'll come speak.
Call for the vote.
Do I have to get a second on?
You got it.
Better?
You have
We
a
did. Okay, so now we can just vote?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can I see a show of hands for a favorable recommendation for rezoning R30 to R10M? Okay, it is unanimous. Next on the agenda is going through the ordinance amending the UDO regarding stormwater management.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hall. I'll walk the planning board through this hopefully very quickly. We talked a lot about this at the last meeting in March. I took the comments that I heard from the planning board members at that meeting and adjusted the draft ordinance that I had shared with you at the March meeting. And I think that I addressed the concerns that I heard from you all at that time. Certainly, if I did not, please let me know that, and we'll continue to adjust the language. Probably the most significant, first of all, when you look at the ordinance, the black strike through and underline were the changes that were presented to you at the meeting in March and represent how it has changed from what is currently in the UDO. I then went back with the red strike through and underline to show you what's been changed since your last meeting in March. So the stuff that I changed for your consideration tonight. So a couple of things, again, based on your comments, we talked about allowing runoff to flow into existing bodies of water that are either on the site or adjacent to the site, whether that's a wetland feature on the site or whether that's a canal or something nearby. So there is language included that allows that to occur. I did include language that basically requires a minimum 30-foot long vegetated swale before the water gets to the wetland or to the canal or so forth. And that's a pretty common requirement in a lot of the state permits and something that I don't think is terribly difficult for someone to meet that standard and is helpful in terms of the water quality. So that's been added based on a comment from the planning board at the last meeting. I did adjust the language to say that you can either use a driveway culvert under the driveway, or you can make accommodations for the water to flow over the dip in the driveway at the right of way. We talked about that for quite some time at the last meeting. removed the language that said the culvert was automatically required, so left it as kind of an option, an either or kind of situation depending on the site conditions. Really, the other most significant change, and this is something I imagine you all will discuss and you should discuss. Initially, the version in March had a requirement that every single family home would be required to infiltrate and store the water on site associated with a 1.5-inch rainfall event. That was for a single family home. I sensed a lot of concern from the planning board members about that requirement. And quite frankly, I struggled with an alternative recommendation to bring to you. What's included in the version tonight is only applying that standard to any lots where the total impervious surface exceeds 30% of the lot. So for example, in Star Hill, where you have a lot of 20,000 square foot lots, if someone has more than 6,000 square feet of impervious coverage, they would be then required to put in appropriate stormwater measures to infiltrate the rainfall from the 2-inch rainfall event on site. And that could be designed by a landscaper, it could be designed by the owner, by a contractor, no requirement for a professional engineer to be involved in that. So anybody who has more than 6,000 square foot would be required to do that. Anybody who has less than that, there's no requirement. And so in Star Hill, surprisingly, there are a lot of homes that have more than 6,000 square feet of impervious coverage. You know, there are some homes that maybe have a 4,000 or 5,000 square footprint for the home, and maybe there's a patio around it and sidewalks and then some pretty long driveways. So as I played around with GIS and looked at lots of examples, this would apply to probably a lot of people in those situations. And you may say 30% is too high of a number, or you may say 30% is too low of a number. That's certainly debatable. Or you may say we really don't need to make these people do anything. And I think that's a reasonable position for the planning board to take. But as I tried to come up with something for you to discuss tonight, I structured it that way with the 30% impervious requirement. Again, if you're less than 30%, you don't have to do anything other than kind of the common sense stuff of keeping the water from flowing out into the street, angling the driveway back, making sure it can flow through the culverts, etc. When you get into some of the smaller lots, we've got a handful of lots in the Bayshore area, for example, that are in the 7,000, 8,000 square foot range. So, 30% of 8,000 is 2,400 square feet. So those folks would have to do this, generally speaking. Now, those homes are generally going to be smaller. They're probably going to build up, so they might have a small footprint. I've played around with 20%. I played around with 25%. I initially started out with 25% because I was trying to mirror the CAMA regulations. And I felt like the 25% standard was going to kick too many people into this requirement, therefore changed it to 30. So that's the most significant change. What I would suggest to you is if you think that's excessive for our single family property owners who might build a new house within an existing neighborhood, just delete that altogether. And we'll rely on the common sense measures regarding the driveways and so forth. If you think you want to have some requirement for people in there, I would suggest something along these lines. And if you think 30% is not the right threshold, pick whatever threshold you think is the right threshold. So that's really the key change. And I'm happy to discuss anything on your mind and answer any questions and be as helpful, hopefully, as I can. So.
Frank, whenever you came up with the 30% number, did you quantify how many people, families, homes that's going to affect?
I did not in any absolute definitive way. I basically went around to all of the neighborhoods in town and just sort of picked at random different homes in Old Cape Carteret or Bayshore, Star Hill, used the GIS tool to do the calculations to kind of see generally who was going to apply to.
But this is just new construction.
Just new construction, yeah, would not apply to existing homes.
Thank you for that.
Well, I think it should apply to existing homes.
What?
Because my neighbors, both of my neighbors have built up on either side of me and are pouring their stormwater down, and I have no recourse. What am I supposed to do about that? So what's fair for new is fair for existing, in my opinion. Now, I'll probably be outvoted on that. But it stinks that people all these years have just done whatever they pleased. And,
Mhm.
and the other thing I'm gonna lobby hard on is the 1.5 inches. The state standard, I don't see any purpose in exceeding it. And I will lobby for that among this board and among the town board. Because I think state standards are there for a reason. All 20 counties have the same. I hate to put our enforcement officer, when we have one, in that position. But that's just me.
Yeah, and again, just to refresh everybody, the current ordinance calls for 2 inches in many circumstances. The board had a lengthy conversation about this the last time, and my perception of that discussion was a majority of you favored the 2-inch standard. So, but that certainly can be adjusted whatever way you'd like.
I have a question. I don't think that Star Hill North falls into any of the conditions that you discussed with regards to driveways and culverts and ditches and things like that. Because the drainage, I mean, I could be totally wrong on this, but I think that the drainage goes down the street, not, I mean, and it has to flow from the driveway into the street. Otherwise, we're going to end up having to recut all driveways because we don't have ditches in Star Hill North. So
Swales.
we have swales, but not in people's yards, behind houses and through the neighborhood. There's like the major corridor for the water to exit, but it goes down the street and into sewer-like drains that dumps it out into the swales.
That, just a comment on that, that was a different way of addressing the problem up in Star Hill North. And if you go up and look at that road, first of all, it's much wider than our road.
Oh, yes.
And second of all, the little swale that we talking about in the yard is in the edge of the road. It's curved up there, and then when it gets, if you look at that, if you look at it, when the road tilts this way or this way, the drains will be on one side, or they'll bank the road to go to the favorable side, okay? And when it
Yes.
runs downhill or uphill, those culverts are all strategically placed, or not drop inlet boxes, I meant, are strategically placed to put
Right.
it. The swales run between the adjacent properties where they should be.
Yes.
So that, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I went up there, I spent 4 or 5 hours driving all around town looking at all this stuff. And that was clearly a different concept of handling rainwater,
Mhm.
and it actually works quite well.
Yes, and that's the point I was making for Deer Creek Drive. We have swale ditches that were designed with the subdivision, and if people will abide by them and not ignore them, it works perfectly well just to have a dip in the driveway. Just exactly like.
Yeah, one comment, and some of you that live in Star Hill North, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure there are any vacant lots in Star Hill North. There might be just a handful here, there. I don't think there are.
Probably less than a handful.
Yeah. So then if this only applied to new construction, it probably, practically speaking, it's not going to apply in Star Hill North. And Star Hill North has done a good job of planning for stormwater whenever that subdivision was constructed 15 years ago or whatever it may be. And it may have been a state stormwater permit. I'm not sure. You may know.
I had nothing to do except
Yeah.
sell them the 70 acres.
But so I think practically speaking, this ordinance wouldn't apply to a vacant lot in Star Hill, to a lot in Star Hill North, because they're already constructed.
Now, if a house was damaged by a storm to the point where it needed to be reconstructed,
I guess theoretically you could have a tornado or something that could come through and rip out everything, but chances are just the structure would be demolished and someone would rebuild the structure. Chances are they wouldn't be redesigning the driveways
yes,
or the
exactly,
foundation
exactly.
stuff.
I just don't want them
so-
to be held to some kind of arbitrary standard that doesn't apply to them because of the way it's written
Yeah.
in Star Hill North.
And that
Yeah.
happened.
Make-
Oh, there were many just torn to pieces.
Oh, yeah.
So the threshold would come into play too. In Star Hill North, if I remember correctly, generally speaking, most folks were under the 6,000 square foot threshold. Most of those lots are 20,000 square foot also. So, but I wouldn't say it couldn't happen. I think it's highly unlikely that that would happen. So,
Maybe there needs, I don't know how you do it in writing an ordinance with a comment about that subdivision, since it is completely different from the rest of the town of
Yeah.
Carter.
But I think the way he wrote it includes it now. I think it didn't last time, but it does now. So
Okay.
it says or incorporate
Well, yeah.
other design feature to effectively divert runoff.
Where are you at?
Page
Section
28.
28?
Mine doesn't have page numbers on it, but it's,
Yeah.
it's in 5C, is that I think is what you're
Yeah.
referring to, right? B5C is the language, other design features.
B5C. Oh, I see. Okay.
You know, I think we certainly could include language to the
Gotcha.
effect of, you know, if the entire subdivision is subject to a subdivision stormwater plan or subdivision stormwater permit, they're not required to meet the individual lot
That would be-
specifications.
That would be more than satisfactory to me. I think that would clarify.
If the entire residential subdivision is subject to a resident, or an entire subdivision stormwater plan or an entire subdivision stormwater permit issued by the state, for example, they would not be held responsible for the individual lot requirements, because theoretically it's already covered by the types of improvements that are included in Star Hill North.
Probably be working against that original plan if you implemented something.
That's
like
right.
this.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. And so like theoretically, for example, let's say a large vacant tract of land left in town gets developed as a residential subdivision. If the permit basically assumes full build out of that new subdivision and incorporates the impervious surface and includes stormwater features for the entire subdivision, certainly you wouldn't want to hold them to an additional standard afterwards. So
Okay.
that I had language like that in one version that I wrote, and I probably should have left it in. So I'll add that back if everybody's comfortable with that concept. So
this may sound silly, but in that same section 5A, it says the driveway shall be sloped down and away from the adjacent road surface, so as to prevent runoff from the driveway from entering the adjacent road. Or, I mean, I'm glad the or and the other things are in there, because a lot of lots are above the road elevation. And you can't change that.
Comment on that, and looking at it, you know, we have, here, a little hang up I had. Some places have culverts underneath the driveway, okay? Particularly in Bay Shore, okay? And that works really pretty well because the street runs long towards the shore, and the ditch, there are ditches going through the culverts, and it passes all the way down there. Other areas use the swale, and I think the swale behind the road edge needs to be specified as the depth, and I would say, for lack of a better number, 6 inches, you know, because when we're looking at it, I went over and looked at Deer Creek, and some of them have a nice 6-inch swale, but some of them don't have much at all, and some of them are dumping right onto the road,
Right,
because it was never enforced
right.
that we follow a specific procedure when
Exactly.
permitting driveways.
Exactly.
So one thing that I felt was important is that somehow, and I think we got it covered for the house because the driveway is part of the property when we build a new property. But we have to have every driveway that's put in, whether it's new or old, needs to come under this regulation, either a culvert or a swale. And that swale needs to not be just the driveway dip down. It needs to be graded out nicely so that that would hold quite a bit of volume, quite a volume of water.
You're preaching to the choir. I love the swales, but now that they haven't been enforced, is the town going to come through with a motor grader?
Well,
Come do swales?
that's not very hard as a zoning officer. When they would come in, and why I say 6 inches, because what I would tell people when they're putting a driveway, when you got that formed up and before you pour, call me. And I lay a 20-foot stick over it to see, because the concrete's going to come to the top of the forms, okay, to see if there was an actual depression in there. And that's something that takes no effort at all to do.
Well, I have begged contractors for 40 years to observe the swales in Deer Creek. That was the first subdivision I ever did after my father died. And it was perfectly planned and done, and the two houses under construction, I have personally begged those contractors to take care of the swale. Now, one of them has put gravel in, and one of them has just barely started, haven't done anything. But these don't apply because they're under construction, right?
If they're already existing homes or currently under construction, currently permitted, it wouldn't
Exactly,
apply, yes.
Exactly. And there may be, there's one vacant lot in Deer Creek Section 1. Couple in Section 2, couple in Section 3. It's just, I'm concerned about existing ones too, that are flooding the street, running down the, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an understandable concern. I think the practical reality of it is that there's probably not a whole lot that you can require the property owner to do in that regard. And then it therefore falls on the town government to address those concerns that are affecting the entire community. And obviously that comes at an expense, and probably not the answer you want to hear, but it's probably the practical answer, so.
There are a couple other points that I want to make. When we talk, first of all, I'm in favor of the 2 inches as opposed to the 1.5 inches, okay? But when you calculate that, okay, let's say we have a pan in the yard, and when you calculate that, if you take the impervious surface that's going to be runoff, do you calculate the size of the holding thing for the water based on 2 inches, or do you make the assumption that some of the water will absorb before it ever gets to the retention device?
Yeah, it's a great point. So this ordinance basically relies on a storage volume equal to the 2 inches. So it's really better than that because with our sandy soils, there's going to be some
2.5,
percolation.
2.25.
Yeah, but this basically takes a conservative approach and says you got to have enough storage volume to handle the runoff from a 2-inch event.
Okay, that brings me to the next point. Okay, if it is in fact that, okay, I don't want individual property owners or a contractor claiming that it is what it is. It needs to be certified by an engineer.
What's our enforcement officer going to be doing? Just checking off somebody else's letter?
Well, no, the stormwater engineers are licensed by the state to look at that thing and run the calculations where a zoning officer probably can't do that. And that's why I say when we have those situations where we have specified that we have to have a retention device to hold some stormwater, that the calculations aren't a contractor sitting on a bulldozer, well, that's big enough.
Yes.
When this was brought up, maybe last fall, about requiring an engineered stormwater plan for all new construction, I had brought up what is the financial burden on the individual homeowner. So I went ahead and called a bunch of civil engineers that do this and got a couple of, decent amounts that it would be. And the lowest was $1,250.
How
to
much?
provide a storm, $1,250. That
Okay.
was the cheapest, and that was about half of what the other ones were. So realistically, it could be a significant burden to somebody that's.
$1,200 on a $350,000.
Well, I said that was the cheapest one. And another problem, and this was significant, is that we have such a serious shortage of engineers that are able to do it, that they're backed up forever. So if we were requiring it, we could be holding off somebody's building for 1.5 years, because even by the time that they can get to this. And it just, when we had discussed it, it just at that point, does anybody remember
I
this
remember.
conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just didn't seem to be beneficial to everybody concerned.
Well, then how do you know? How do you have any idea whether anybody, here's my concern. They're building bigger and bigger houses on smaller and smaller lots. And now they also got the problem of the septic system they're gonna fit in there somewhere. But they're building these big houses, and if you have no way to hold them to it, you have no way to control it.
Well, they end it, when they provide their plan, it doesn't have to be an engineered stormwater plan by a certified, with the stamp and all the other stuff. But somebody is going to provide the plan. And in most cases, it's just simple math, to do so that should be done by whoever is the permit.
Well, if he's having, I'm
Officer
saying
should
if he's,
check that.
well, you're talking the difference between a site plan that's generated by some real estate agent as opposed to one that's, generated by an engineer.
Well, I think I think this is the crux of the policy decision, right? How much burden do you want to place on the individual property owner? Is it worth the expense? Do you want to delay them with time and money and so forth? So this is the question. But keep in mind, when the contractor or the landscaper or maybe even the property owner designs their individual stormwater system for their, say, 4,000 square feet of impervious coverage on their lot, the surveyor is going to have to show that on the survey that they provide when they apply for their building permit. It is simple math. The calculations are not difficult for anyone to come up with, but it is going to be dependent on proper enforcement by the town. I mean, our zoning officer is going to have to make sure they're reviewing the plans and that the person has complied. And a landscaper could do it. The contractor could do it. And then we're going to have to make sure that they actually build it. And when we go to approve the CO, they're going to keep tabs on it while it's under construction. And then we're not going to approve the CO until we've verified they've sized it appropriately. So.
On one of the pages on the site plans, I have no idea what page it is, but I think the calculation is actually on that.
Yes, it's on pages
Yeah.
3 and 4. Frank spelled it out clearly.
I understand the calculation.
Yeah.
But when you look at a piece of property, okay, without a lot of engineering detail, just a site plan, can you tell whether that's going to hold the water? And that's
what I'm saying. The calculation is on the site plan itself. On the site plan itself.
there isn't a person in this room that could go look at that calculation and look at a yard and say whether that meets it or not.
Well, you underestimate us if we have this little calculation right here. Sure. I mean, all it takes is.
I'm not questioning the calculation. That's simple. I'm questioning,
Compliance.
yeah,
Comply.
that's all I am.
So could the code, or is your question, could the code enforcement officer reasonably be expected to look at land and say, this calculation meets what I see built? Is that your
Yeah.
question?
And I'll give you some examples. When I was the permitting officer, this was a big deal with me. And I always made them form the driveway before they poured it, and they had to have an inspection before that. And it took me just and I told them that they could call me at home and I would come out and look at it. And I made the judgment. If I think that'll hold the water from getting on the street, I was fine with it, signed right off. And that's why I say if we put 6 inches in there, that'd take a lot of the doubt out of it rather than just say, I looked at 500 driveways since the last meeting. And some of them run it right into the street. Some of them might hold a little bit, and some of them do it the way they're supposed to.
So I think we can certainly add the 6-inch minimum depth for the driveway dip if that's the planning board's direction tonight. That's a reasonable thing to include. When it comes to the requirement, whether you have an engineer do it or a general contractor or a landscaping contractor, you got to keep in mind that it's a spectrum, right? So in the past, we didn't require anybody to do anything. If you want to go to the other extreme, you could say, yeah, you got to have an engineer and he or she's got to design it to some super standard. This is kind of a middle of the road improvement, so to speak, for the town to consider. So that was the thought process behind it. But if you want to be absolutely certain and you're comfortable with the property owner bearing that cost, then you can go and include something like that. But this is, I think, an incremental improvement. So,
Yeah, I don't want to go that route. I just don't think it's, I think what you're talking about is the enforcement is the key piece to it. It's not like the engineer is going to come back out after the house is built just to make sure. It has to do with the enforcement of it, not the plan itself necessarily.
And
So,
we can handle that by putting a requirement for the zoning permit
mhm.
that the calculation be illustrated.
Sure.
Doesn't have to be by an engineer, just that the calculation be illustrated as this formula calls for.
Yeah, you don't need a
Ab-
magnifying
absolutely.
glass.
So-
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Whereas you didn't have any rules, now you're gonna have some. You're just gonna hope they have the right morals and
Well,
values to go
this is
with
a
it.
step in the right direction. I totally
Yeah.
agree with the
If they
direction that
don't,
we're
call them
going.
out.
'Cause we did nothing before. And, the problem isn't in the commercial zones, it's in the residential zones where the water problem is. So that's the biggest part that we have to address. And, in my experience, it wasn't, if you talk to the people before the bulldozers and everything were all done, they were really good about it. And they said, well, we'll make sure that happens. And in most cases, I was happy. There was one that I wasn't, he had to put a culvert underneath because of the way the lot was shaped. But anyway.
But yes, I agree with you. But if, Madam Chairman, if I could quote from this excellent briefing. To put this in perspective, a new residential home with 4,000 square feet of impervious surface might include a 2,000 square footprint, 2,000 square footprint, and a 100-foot long, 12-foot wide driveway with an extra 20 by 40 parking area. With the proposed 1.5-inch requirement, the project would require 500 cubic feet of storage. This could be accomplished simply by grading a 50 feet by 10-foot depression that is 1 foot deep in the yard, directing all runoff toward the depression via gutters, downspouts, and the proper sloping of the driveway. And of course it would be grassed or sodded or something, but excellent, spells it right out. And if we put that in our requirement for a zoning permit, bingo.
Well, I understand that, but it takes an inspection at the appropriate time by the enforcement officer.
Certainly before the CO.
Correct. Well, before they sod it. Yeah. At the right time.
Ideally, that communication's occurring throughout the process as you described, and that would be the goal. But we've got to have a person assigned to handle those tasks. So you're absolutely correct. It's all in the enforcement, regardless of who designs it.
Do we currently have an enforcement officer? Or are we using?
I'm interviewing folks right now, so.
Who's doing it now, County?
Essentially, it's a combination of me and Barbara at this point in time. And honestly, we're not doing as good of a job as we should be doing. Not for lack of trying, but just because, But the key to this is all in the enforcement and making sure. And one of the goals for this new position is someone to take ownership of this entire process and be on top of everything and staying in relative frequent communication with the contractors and being on site and so forth. And we just don't have the staffing to do that right now, but that's what I'm hoping we'll get to.
Frank, can I ask you a quick question? You mentioned a 6-inch, or somebody mentioned a 6-inch drop. Is that, I don't know where that 6 inches is. Is it the slope of the driveway?
Here's, if you've got a driveway formed up, getting ready to pour concrete.
Okay.
And it's right at the edge of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 inches, I'm not sure that's the right number. I just threw out a number, okay? If you lay a straight edge across the forms, okay, they bend them up just to see that there's a depression, because
So you're talking about a 6-inch fall from the high
Where-
corner of
for the road,
from grade to the road.
yes.
From the
Now,
edge of the driveway
From
back
the-
to the
from the-
culvert,
from grade.
center of the culvert.
From
From the top of the road?
House,
the house down to the road.
Okay.
So the
runs it
fall
down.
would be 6 inches. Is that what you mean?
What I'm saying is, at the roadway, since we only have 20-foot wide roadways, the edge of the right-of-way, okay, has to hold water. And I threw out 6 inches, and maybe it's 4, okay? But I'm saying the driveway has to slope down, and the front of the yard has to have this place where it'll hold a little bit of water. Or, just right at the edge of the road in that 20 feet that you have that's part of the right of way.
How do you do
Yeah.
that without curbs and stuff?
You
just have a
grade it.
swale.
You grade it.
Yeah, a swale.
Yeah, so typically,
Center.
in most cases, you'll have roughly 15 feet of right-of-way from the edge of the asphalt to the property line. Not always, but in most cases in Cape Carteret. So that's basically a fall of 1 foot over 15 foot. So that's a pretty reasonable slope that you could probably accommodate in there if you make it 6 inches. Obviously, if you make it 4 inches, it's even better. But the way the ordinance is written, it gives you the option. You could either do that, or if there's an existing ditch or swale there, you can have some sort of driveway grate to catch it and force it into the swale, or you could have some other feature to divert the water into the swale or the ditch that's existing currently. So I think it's a reasonable thing to include.
So for something like that, would you need an engineer to design that as well, or just just the contractor
Well-
to do that and have it measured?
So I
Should
see
be able
now,
to, okay.
when we start using numbers like 6 inches and without asking, at least asking an engineer, whoever it is that we have for the town, I don't think we should spitball it, that a specific number, if it's gonna be in the ordinance and somebody is gonna have to design a property, a project to that. I think I think before we put that in, we should, maybe throw that number to an engineer and ask them what.
I don't agree that we should have a number at all. There's too many variables.
Well, if you don't have a number, make it flat, make it run right into the street.
I'm just saying, we're trying to establish rules to prevent that.
Right, but if you have no number, how do you do it?
Yeah, so I think 6 inches is probably reasonable, probably doable. We could make it 4 inches, probably easier to accomplish, probably not unreasonable. I'm happy to talk with some engineers and get their recommendation on it and plug in a number for you. But I think the basic concept is you just want it to not flow straight into the road. You want it to flow back off of the road.
Yeah,
So
I came up with that because I looked at so many roads where this one had done that, sloped into the road, and there's one right in the big room. It's just a straight running right into the street.
Mhm.
And there's lack of enforcement, but even these kinds of ordinance regulations that we put in place will be helpful for a zoning officer to get compliance and get it out of the street.
For new houses.
All right, we'll get to.
And hopefully,
Yeah.
whatever new developments we have, the roads will be crowned a little bit and we won't have.
Well, you've got, the new developments have to have a stormwater engineer's plan, so I'm not worried about them. That's what happened at Star Hill North. They did all that for us, okay?
Yeah.
Didn't have to worry about the individual lots.
And they didn't buy a single foot of property that didn't drain extremely well.
Even
Oh,
for
it's a hilltop.
Florence, we had no standing water other than that spot on Bahia where the asphalt is a little dropped.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That's the only place where we had standing water. It's amazing.
There is a piece of the national forest that comes up to the paved road that they didn't buy.
Right.
Because it didn't
We're on
work.
St. Augustine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was just.
I was running my mouth. I had a little issue with redevelopment, okay? Maybe I'm just always looking at things to see everything. But you said if they're not redeveloping and adding over 1,000 square feet, they don't have to do anything. But what if somebody is pushing the limits on new construction and you call them on the amount of impervious surface, okay? You call them out on the amount of impervious surface, so they delete something and then try to get it in under the 1,000 square feet after they got their CO. Is that an issue? You don't know that.
So is there an opportunity there for someone to exploit a loophole and
Yes,
maybe
loophole is the word I got right.
maybe they do something and the 30% threshold is 6,000 square feet and they put 5,500 square feet in and they don't have to do anything and they come back later and they add 900 to do sidewalk or whatever. But, so it's possible. Can we prevent everything like that from happening? probably not, and it's probably not worth the effort. So.
Well, no,
No, I mean, I think the loophole does exist, and I think you just can't control you can't plan for every possible loophole. You do the best you can. But like, for example, if there's an existing home now that was built in, I don't know, 1986, and it's got 5,500 square feet of impervious coverage, and they're doing fine, it's a 20,000 square foot lot, and they come in right now, if this ordinance was in place and they came in and they were building a swimming pool patio, and they were adding 900 feet, the way this ordinance is written, they wouldn't have to do anything new. And that's a policy decision. If you all don't agree with that, tell me, and we can adjust however you like. I mean, we can get into calculations of the total impervious coverage that existed previously plus the new. That's another approach you could take. That's not the approach that I took when I wrote this. I basically said if it's less than 1,000 square feet, you don't have to do anything. Could someone exploit that, build a new house, and come back in a year or two? Yeah, they probably could. How often is that going to happen? That's where you all are balancing the policy with the reality out there. So with the, okay, all right, okay.
All right, this satisfies. If someone were to come in and add less than 1,000 feet, but exceed the formula for impervious, would you agree for language for the town to say no?
yes, that's exactly my point.
There you go.
I'm saying that
Add that or.
they have to meet the standards that everybody else has on a new house.
Okay.
You know, just don't give them a free pass on 1,000 square feet. Yeah, you know, if they say they had 900 left over, okay, the 25 or 30%, whatever it is, that's exactly what I'm saying. That we ought to hold people that have existing homes that are built to the same standard that the new people are.
For redevelopment.
Yeah, and so if that's the planning board's policy direction, I can absolutely incorporate that and write it that way. But just understand that it would then, every single home that had an expansion or did some sort of new impervious coverage, you may be kicking more people into this requirement. And if you're comfortable with that and believe there's benefit for that, great. And we'll do it and incorporate it. But that's what you need. If all of you agree with Mike's and Paxton's comments, I will make that amendment and bring it back to you.
I just
giving you the English.
It becomes so subjective to the individual property and what they have there already and what's working. And, you know, if it's something like what Paxton's talking about, where both adjacent properties are draining into her property, well then, you know, if they want to each put a pool in.
Yeah.
And now it's an issue. But if it was like over by where we live, I don't think it would, you know, because we don't have an issue with it. So I think I think it has to be, I think you have to give the permitting and zoning, and the people who are doing that for us, I think you have to give them some leeway to make these decisions, as long as as long as we have the stated goals that we want to get to.
Yeah,
that kind of, you know, drives them.
you know, first of all, I agree with putting something in there for existing homes, you know, whether it was 1,000 or 500 or 1,500, didn't matter to me. I see why that's in there, to give people flexibility to buy a new property, wanted to do something different than what the owners before had. But I'm just saying we need to think about whether we hold them to the same standard that we do new development or not, if they happen to be at the limit.
So the question,
Here's what I would propose. Okay. If they can go up to 1,000 feet, if that does not exceed what would be required if it were a new home.
Same thing that I said, yeah.
okay, so, and that's a reasonable position for you all to take. If that's the will of the majority of the planning board, I'll incorporate that. One question for you. when that person gets kicked over the 30% threshold and they're adding, say, I don't know, 900 square feet of impervious coverage, do you want them to store and infiltrate the runoff from the 1.5-inch rainfall event for the entire site that might have existed for the last 20 or 30 years, or do you want just the new impervious coverage that they're adding? Do you understand what I'm asking? So they'd have to go back and retrofit and deal with the entire site if they meet that 30% threshold.
I would say no on that. I
Yeah,
would say only the
Now
new
you're
site.
changing the whole.
The way it's written currently, it's only the new impervious
Yeah.
coverage.
Because that's the delta. That's what they're adding to
Okay.
the stormwater runoff. So if they accommodate that, I'm good with it.
Okay, and that's the question I'm asking you all, because I want to write it the way that you want it to be written. So,
Well, I mean, I'm free to be outvoted on that because I just have a different.
You're sensitive,
Yeah.
and I understand why.
I just think it's very difficult for people who maybe own a lot, vacant lot for years and years. And now they're in difficulty because of what the town has allowed the neighbors to do. Just,
No, it's true.
this is what I've heard you all say this evening, and please correct me if I'm wrong. If it's a residential subdivision that has a subdivision plan or permit for the entire subdivision, a la Star Hill North, they're not required to do anything at the individual lot level. If it is a new or a replacement driveway, they're required to meet the standards to tilt it back or to dump it into a culvert or a grate or something at the driveway. Specify the minimum depth, whether that's 4 inches or 6 inches, seek some input from an engineer and incorporate that in the new draft. Make sure they have a illustrated plan for their stormwater infiltration and storage. Still prepared, could be by the landscape contractor or the general contractor or the owner. And then the final note that I have is for modifications or expansions of existing single-family homes. If the modification or expansion kicks them over the 30% threshold, they would be required to store and infiltrate the runoff from the new impervious coverage at the 1.5-inch rainfall event.
One other
Unless we want to change that to 2.
That's correct. If you want whatever number you want it to be.
Right.
So.
I was in favor of 25% over 30%, only because it's 25% in the 575 region anyway, and that would, I can just see the people, why you make me doing 30
Yeah.
and they only have to do 25?
Well, the 30% is a
Better.
lower standard.
Better.
Yeah.
25% is more stringent in this
wouldn't-
application.
Why wouldn't they be the same?
The number could be, the percentage impervious could be whatever number you think is appropriate. I started out with 25 and I was trying to tie it to the CAMA regulations. And quite frankly, I thought that it was going to affect too many people and potentially present a hardship for them. But if you think 25% is a better number, or 20 or 40, that's up for debate.
Because everybody knows that number, but I'm fine with your explanation. I'm fine with 30%. If the board wants it, I'm good with that.
Quick.
yeah, I'm good with 30. And I think that was a great approach
Yes.
to weeding out who we would want to focus on the stormwater. Set up everybody.
Well said.
So I'm dubious that you'll have an engineer give you an inch.
idea.
Yeah, and again, as I shared with you when we started this conversation at the last meeting, I would just encourage all of us, myself included, to recognize that no ordinance is perfect, right? Like, you're never going to address every possible situation. I think the goal as a community is to make as positive of a difference as we can on these issues going forward, because you're not going to be perfect. You can't.
I think the effort so far has been sincere. We're getting there. We certainly can't do anything tonight if we're redoing some of these things and getting more information, but maybe by next month we'll be in a better position
I'll make the changes and I'll make sure I highlight those in a different color for you for consideration at the next meeting. So
Was there
I might turn
any
into a
change-
rainbow, but.
Was there any changes to the words in red? So can we at least let Frank?
You mean tonight, as a result of tonight's?
Yes, is there anything that
In
we're
the red
changing
that
in the
should be
red
addressed.
right now? Are we lining anything else out? Or making changes to that? Because it looks to me like there's just really additions. I just don't want Frank to keep having to come back and
No, it sounded like there was only additions.
we, yeah. And reinvent the wheel over and over.
Well, I will present a new draft to you at the May meeting, and you can review that. And if you're comfortable, we'll then send it on to the Board of Commissioners. If not, we'll take as much time as you'd like.
Got a question. Would it be ahead of the game if we voted on the 1.5 or the 2 now, and then you can put them in the next draft as your finalization for us to talk about?
I wouldn't be comfortable bringing that.
2 inch or the 1.5?
No, I would rather see everything together so it's clearer.
But to answer your question, that could be one thing that we do after we see the final revised draft.
Yeah, as it stands now, the commercial projects or residential subdivisions or anything non-single family residential is a 2-inch standard. The single family homes are a 1.5-inch standard. And that was the feedback that I thought I took from you all after the last meeting, but you can adjust it in any way you'd like.
Is that consistent with state standards or is it more stringent than state
I
standards?
think the state's 1 inch, isn't it? 1 inch.
So it's not exactly a straightforward answer. A lot of it depends on where you're located in proximity to receiving bodies of water and what the water quality classification is there.
Okay.
But generally speaking, it's a 1.5-inch standard. So yeah, in most cases it'll be 1.5 inches. If it's something that's going to be near highly sensitive waters and a pretty significant project, it could be as high as 3.7 is what it comes out to. It's more complicated than that, but that's kind of the simple explanation of it. What we have in here is 2 inches, which exceeds the state standard in most cases. And keep in mind also that right up front, the ordinance says if you need a state stormwater permit, that's going to govern, right? That's the key thing. But what it does say is if you need a state stormwater permit and the state only applies the 1.5-inch threshold, we're going to make you do 2, right? And that's not changing. That's in your current ordinance as it stands here today, right? So we're already more stringent than most of the state regulations, which require 1.5.
Can we do that? Can we override?
You absolutely can have a higher standard if that's the will of the community. So,
Just not a lower standard?
well, yeah, I mean, you could have a lower standard, but the state's going to supersede that requirement. So,
Okay, so are we good on discussion? Frank's going to take those 4.
yeah, I think it was a helpful discussion. Good comments from everybody, and I'll make the changes and hopefully I'll get it right and you'll be happy with it.
It
So.
isn't like it has to happen tomorrow because.
That's right.
Wait 25 years to have something like this.
No, but lots of good comments, so thank you.
Although we have had a lot of building this past year, so. I don't know, we don't really have that many lots left.
No, about,
Yeah.
what about 15, between 15 and 20% vacant?
Yeah, that sounds about right, but maybe even less than that.
Okay, folks, the next planning board meeting is Tuesday, May 16th. Frank, you have any final comments?
Yeah, just a couple things to keep you apprised of. I don't know if the General Assembly will ultimately enact these regulations, but there's a few things that are currently under consideration by the General Assembly. One, there's a bill that would essentially eliminate extraterritorial jurisdiction altogether. And I don't know what the prognosis is, whether that has a lot of support or doesn't have a lot of support. The North Carolina League of Municipalities, which represents the 500 plus cities and towns in North Carolina, is opposed to it and is actively lobbying against that bill. We'll see where that goes. But if that becomes law, then the handful of properties that Cape Carteret has in its ETJ would no longer be subject to the town's zoning regulations. And we also wouldn't have an ETJ representative on the board also. And again, I don't know if this has a good chance of being approved or a slim chance of being approved. I just wanted to make you aware of it. There's also, there's increasing concern about housing affordability everywhere and now in North Carolina. So there are a couple bills out there. One essentially requires communities to allow accessory dwelling units, garage apartments, or things like that. We currently don't allow that in our Unified Development Ordinance, but the state law that's proposed would say you have to allow those kinds of things, subject to reasonable standards and restrictions. And I think their thinking on that is it provides a more affordable housing option for people. And so the other thing that you, just to make you aware of, is there's another bill that would essentially require municipalities to approve workforce housing developments, certain multifamily housing developments that meet workforce housing criteria in any zoning district. And so that one, if I had to guess, that one probably has the slimmest chance of being approved, but your guess is as good as mine. I just wanted to make you aware of these things. There's a lot going on right now, and we'll deal with whatever comes our way.
Is workforce housing temporary housing?
No, the term workforce housing is intended to apply to folks maybe with lower incomes, and I don't necessarily mean like Section 8 housing or anything like that, but just normal working people in the community that are being squeezed out by yeah, that's right. That's right. So, yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Particularly in highly desirable areas like ours, right? So.
That's interesting because, and thank you for briefing us on those. This is important. When Mike was talking about the addition, I thought how wonderful it would be if people were allowed to build apartments for mothers-in-law or even granny pods that have been proposed in the past. Something that could be moved in and then moved out for an in-law, for a parent who needs care.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
redevelopment.
I read that on the thing that you just said about allowing more density in single family. It unfortunately has, it's a political issue. You take a piece of ground in the middle of Cape Carteret per acre is a lot more expensive than 10 miles up 58 or 5 miles up 58. So, there's all kinds of space for this housing that's more affordable, yet I don't know. They had to get.
Individual choice. You choose to move somewhere. If you can't afford it, don't go.
What's that?
Choose to move somewhere. If you can't afford it, you don't go.
Yeah.
You're gonna make your property devalue to
It doesn't
accommodate.
devalue property.
You don't think so?
No, yeah, I don't think so.
But I thought that was interesting that the state's getting into that, and the only thing we really have here with regard to a service as a municipality is the water, which we pay for. Okay, and if you go up 58, you'd have to drill a well. Okay, but I don't know. It's
So
just,
they have the water system, West Carteret waters and still.
well, I meant where there's a lot cheaper land than what's right down on the waterfront, okay? That's the point.
Sound water, not drinking water.
No, I meant drinking water. The only thing that the only service, we don't have septic. We have to have a police force, but water is the only thing. The only thing if they went 10 miles up 58, the only thing they'd have to do is different than down here, put in a well, okay?
But they do have West Carteret water up 58.
Well, how far?
To Stella.
Well,
That's what she said.
2 miles past Stella. That's the point I'm making.
Then you go in the maze though.
So anyway, we'll continue to monitor these bills and adjust accordingly if anything comes of them. There's one other bill that would essentially prohibit municipalities from banning vacation rental units. It does allow for reasonable regulations for vacation rental units. Of course, we don't have any regulations right now, but there are lots of communities that are trying to do those kinds of things. And from a personal standpoint, it's interesting to me that these are very California style laws coming to North Carolina because these are all in place in California right now. So it's a little surprising in that sense. But
Leading the way again.
so
Get away.
So
Get away.
So did we leave the 1.5 inch, 2 inch infiltration requirement for another time? Did we vote on that and I miss it?
Well, we voted on it
That's
last
what I
time,
asked.
that we were 3-2 last time, so unless Susan
That's what we were
makes us
asking about.
3-3,
I wanted to wait till she saw the whole
yeah.
format.
well, the next version you see will maintain 2 inches for commercial and institutional and new subdivisions, and it'll maintain 1.5 for the single family lots. And you all can, again, adjust in whatever way you'd like.
Frank, I apologize. My mind was elsewhere. Would you repeat what you just said?
When I bring the new version back to you next time, it will show 2 inches for new commercial projects,
Okay.
new institutional projects,
Okay.
new residential subdivisions, and it'll show 1.5 inches for a single family lot that somebody's building an individual home on. And you all can adjust either of those in any way you'd like.
We can decide if we want to adjust that.
Keep it or throw it. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Anybody have comments? Anything, any save rounds? Nothing? Okay, folks, this is my last meeting, and it has been a blast. I've enjoyed working with you guys so much. And the work that this board did on the UDO was incredible. And I'm so proud of the effort that everybody put in. There was a lot that went into that. A lot of personal time, a lot of research that everybody had to do on their own. And I'm very proud of the work that this board did. It was, it was time to do it 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And we finally, we got it done. So that's something I'm very proud of. And I just have enjoyed serving my community, and I hope that more people step up, and it looks like they are, to start serving on boards and committees like this. So that's it.
Well, thank you, Susan. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Here, can you give that to her, the card? We all sent a card last time to say thank you
Thank you
for your
very
fearless
much.
leadership.
So with regards to Susan's leadership, I do have a comment to make. Thank you so much because you took over at a time where we were starting off at ground zero. And that's the hardest time to come in because you've got to build the team and build the whole organization, set the tone and everything. And you did a fantastic job. And I've been proud to serve under you.
Okay, can I make a motion to adjourn? Okay, second, all in favor?
Adjourn.
Folks, thank you so much.
Thank you. So have you gotten some applications for the planning board?
Yeah, I think we've got 7 or 8 left.
Oh,
I'm gonna
good.
check. The deadline is later this month, so I think it's the 30th.
You know, some